so much for waiting for us while we got ready for today's seminar, which I am delighted to say we have the absolutely incredible Errin Haines, one of the co-founders of the 19th Asterisk, and the asterisk is important, which is a media outlet whose time has absolutely come. It's a non-profit, non-partisan newsroom reporting on gender politics and policy out of the United States at a time when the questions about diversity, about equality, about different narratives, centering different people's stories is more important than ever, both in the United States, but actually elsewhere as well. We were going to have Emily Ramshaw, who was the other co-founder of the organization, but she couldn't make it. And I'm so glad that Errin is here because, as I said, when I was preparing for this and I was reading about the 19th, all the stories that struck me, all the quotes that struck me were yours, Errin. And I do remember thinking, I'm really pleased we got Emily, but I wish we'd asked Errin to join the call as well. So thank you for joining us. As we said,
it all worked out. Thank you for having me.
It did work out brilliantly. Can I just pass it over to you to tell us a little bit about the 19th? We have people in the room who are from all around the world. Some of them will be familiar with your work, and for some it'll be completely new. So in your own words, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mira, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for a bit here and your interest in the 19th, the new nonpartisan nonprofit newsroom that I helped to launch, just over 11 months ago, almost a year ago already, which is insane to think about. But yes, this newsroom was actually the brainchild of my now boss, Emily Ramshaw, our CEO and visionary, who, shortly after the 2016 election was extremely frustrated with the way that gender had been covered in the 2016 cycle. Hillary Clinton, obviously, being the trailblazer that she was, but really the lone woman in that race, and someone who was a qualified, capable, and talented politician, but got so many questions about her ambition, about her likability, about her electability, that kind of dogged her. And Emily, thought to herself, what are we doing? We know that women are not only the majority of the US population, but the majority of our electorate. And yet we are treated too often like a special interest group. And, our issues are often, kind of relegated to women's issues as opposed to all of the issues, whether that's the economy or healthcare or education or you name it. And so, she had this idea, somebody should start a newsroom, basically, that tells a news story around gender, politics, and policy. But at the time, she just had a baby. And she kind of put that idea on the back burner. She had already kind of helped to start a pretty successful nonprofit newsroom here in the US, the Texas Tribune. That was about a decade ago, and was editor-in-chief there. And so, headed into 2020, as a record 6 women stood for president here in our Democratic presidential primary, some of those same, narratives around gender and also race were really starting to rear their ugly heads again. And why wouldn't they? Because our political press corps still is unfortunately too white and too male in too many newsrooms across this country. And so Emily said to herself, you know what, it's time. It is time to start this. This has not happened yet. She was kind of hoping somebody else would do it, but that didn't happen. And so she said, okay, why not me? Why not now? And so last spring, Emily actually reached out to me on Twitter. I did not know her. We did not know each other at all. And but she'd been following me. She'd been following my work. And so she reaches out to me. I have no idea what she wants. I'm thinking, does she want to try to offer me a job? I'm not moving to Austin. What do you want? And she says, that she wants to start this newsroom. She tells me about the vision for the 19th. And I was very excited, honestly. And I was excited because I was frustrated myself on the campaign trail, covering the women who were running for president, covering the people of color who were running for president as our national race writer at the Associated Press, which was my dream job, a job that I had always wanted. And I'd finally gotten it back in 2017. And, I was writing about race and gender, but the more that I wrote about it, the more that I came to truly believe. I already went into 2020 thinking that race was going to be the story of the election cycle. But what I came to understand was that race and gender were not only going to be a storyline of 2020, but they were going to be the storyline. And that was even before the pandemic. That was even before the racial reckoning. That was pretty much where I was. And so I felt like I wanted to be in a place where we were saying that, not just me as an individual, as a Black woman who was covering these issues for the AP, which is the largest and oldest news gathering organization in the world. But I felt like we should be saying it as a newsroom, as a politics team. And there were not too many politics teams, I felt like, that were capable of, that currently existed, that were capable of doing that. And so I felt like kind of the fastest and best way to really address a lot of the issues I saw around, confronting those racial and gendered narratives. And also, frankly, creating the kind of newsroom that I think a lot of us now wish we had had earlier in our careers, was really just to start over. And so that was what we endeavored to do when we launched the 19th. Obviously, for those who are not aware, the 19th is named for the 19th Amendment of the US Constitution, which guaranteed some, but not all women, their right to suffrage. And our logo, if you have seen it before, has an asterisk on it. And that asterisk is in recognition of the omission of the Black women in particular, who did not get their access to the franchise in 1920 because they were sacrificed by the white women who wanted their right to vote at the expense of others. In 1920, Native American women in this country were not even recognized as citizens. And you had Latino women and Asian American women who were also excluded, using language barriers to keep them from the franchise. And of course, Black women would have to fight for nearly half a century for their access to the ballot, which came pretty much with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so launching this newsroom 100 years after the passage of the 19th Amendment, 55 years after the Voting Rights Act, in what I really believed was the most consequential election of our time, it felt overdue, but at the same time, it felt very urgent and it felt extremely timely. And I can truly say that even in the midst of a pandemic, our mission could not be more important. It could not feel more urgent. The pandemic in this country has been something, especially from an economic perspective, that has disproportionately hit women who have been, impacted by and responding to the coronavirus in an extraordinary way. Whether we're talking about the conversation around the inequality piece around the kinds of jobs that women have, being essential workers, being domestic workers, being frontline healthcare workers, or whether we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of women who have had to drop out of the US workforce because of childcare issues, because of the way that our childcare system is set up in America, and how we kind of, say that responsibility is on parents. And so I think a lot of the lessons that we're learning are going to shape policy going forward. We're excited to be covering those issues, but also, we got our first female vice president in the history of this country, which is huge for us. And so, the election did come back into focus, and it ended up being something that was right in our wheelhouse, that was right within that asterisk. And so our first year has been tremendous, and we're just getting started. We're so excited. And I'm so excited to talk to all of you and to hear, what more I can tell you about who we are and where we're going next.
Thank you so much. If you have questions, everybody, please do type them in chat and I'll read them out as we go along. I would like to start with just, can you give us a sense, you've been here for 11 months. How's it going in terms of audience numbers? Where are you finding your readers are coming from most? Are there any surprises?
Yeah, I mean, so, our audience is growing exponentially. It really has exploded. I mean, just to give you an example of the level of interest that we have had, even in the midst of a pandemic. This summer we were planning, of course, if we had been out in the world, we would have had a summit around the launch of our official newsroom, our website, our beautiful website. And I'm biased, but it is pretty good. But we would have had a summit for our launch that also coincided with the actual 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment back in August. And we were planning on doing that in Philadelphia, which is actually where I am based. And we were hoping that maybe we could get, maybe 1,000 people to show up at this summit over a few days. But because of the pandemic, it was a virtual environment. We were able to welcome more people, but we were also able to get just an amazing, amazing lineup of people who had heard about the 19th, who were excited about being in conversation with us about, trailblazing women in politics, about, the intersection of race and gender, and about, how women were going to factor into this electorate. And so we had a powerhouse lineup that included everybody from Stacey Abrams, the champion of voter expansion and who has been fighting against voter suppression in this country, a black woman who ran to try to become the first woman governor, a black woman governor of Georgia, in the United States, out of Georgia. We had Hillary Clinton, who reflected on her pioneering campaign. We had Kamala Harris, who had just been named, just two days before our interview, had been named the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic ticket. And we had Meghan Markle, who had tremendous interest in the 19th. Who knew? We didn't, but found out that she was very interested in talking about issues of gender and media, and new media. And so we didn't have 1,000 people to show up over the course of our 4-day virtual summit. We had nearly 200,000.
Wow.
And so that really said to us and affirmed for us that we were onto something, that this is a conversation that women want to have, and really all women. I mean, honestly, we launched saying that we wanted to be a home for all women and marginalized folks who have been left out and unseen and unheard in this democracy for too long. And I think that the journalism that we are doing speaks to that. We started with a cadre of 5 women who we refer to ourselves as the founding mothers of the 19th. But since then, we have almost quadrupled in size. I think, 80% of my colleagues I've never met in person because of the pandemic. But honestly, I think that we have really managed to bond and come together over the shared mission and vision that we have. And I think that, our storytelling really reflects that, and it is resonating with people in this moment, across ideological spectrums, across the geographical divide in this country, and really across gender. I mean, there are men who are also very much in support. The LGBTQ community is seeing themselves reflected in a way that they really have not seen before in a mainstream outlet focused on politics. It really has to about politics through the lens that we have, and to see the kind of journalism that can be produced as a result.
Thank you. I have a question about this because are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I have a question. You said before, because you were at AP, as was I, before you were there as well. And it's a big international organization with the resources and, fairly reasonably diverse newsroom. And yet you kind of said you didn't feel that the kind of the basis of inherent, the structures inherent in political journalism coverage were going to be fixed fast enough and structurally by staying there, and you felt the only way to fix that is to start over. It's really struck me as an interesting comment, because you said that, and I'm inclined to agree with you, but it's also a time when these big newsrooms are trying to have these conversations about diversity. Do you think that really the only way is to completely start over with the organizations, or do you think there is something that can be done internally?
Well, no, I don't think it's the only way. I think it was the fastest way for us. Because we have been very intentional about building an extremely diverse newsroom, and we are, certainly in the process of accomplishing that, and we are committed to that as our newsroom continues to expand. It is important, but I know that it is not something that happens organically, and especially when it comes to covering politics in this country. I mean, because again, political journalism is the purview of mostly white, mostly male people in this country. When they are looking around for colleagues, they tend to look for people who look like them. And that is not me, or somebody who has kind of risen through, a similar pipeline to them, somebody who maybe has a similar pedigree, whether that's educationally or otherwise, to them. that wasn't me. And if that had been the case, I would not have been necessarily covering this election. Now, I was on our politics team as our race writer when I was at the Associated Press. And certainly that was a tremendously rewarding job, again, because of the platform that it was. But I mean, that politics team was not particularly diverse at the time. I was writing these stories, and certainly, we had diverse coverage largely because of a lot of the work that I did. But to be able to say the things that I wanted to say about this election this year, namely that racism was on the ballot for many voters, particularly Black and brown voters, that Black women were and have been the backbone of democratic politics in this country and this democracy, and that women were going to be the deciders of this election. Like, to be able to say that, not as kind of sidebars, but really as the central themes of 2020 was really important to me. And that was not something that would have been able to happen, at a place that didn't really see the election in those terms and really wasn't going to frame it that way. But again, this was not something that was unique to the Associated Press. You look at, the newsrooms of most mainstream legacy outlets, especially in terms of their political teams, while some of them have increased their diversity somewhat, if, and I believe this, if you are somebody who believes that you cannot cover race, you cannot cover politics in America right now without having a working knowledge of how race and racism work in this country. And as somebody who covered race for most of my career, I felt like far easier for me to learn how to cover politics, which I've covered for less time, than it has been for political reporters to figure out the racial dynamics of our politics today. And so, thinking about it that way and approaching it that way, I think for newsrooms who are wanting to make these changes, and there are, Mira, to your point, a lot of newsrooms that are reckoning with this now. Mm-hmm. I will also say that it is deeply gratifying that from day one of talking to Emily about even thinking about coming to this newsroom, she is somebody that I know was thinking about equity as a core value of what she wanted the 19th to stand for, both in terms of our coverage, but also in terms of the newsroom that we were building. And I think that matters, because the idea that we were talking about that 18 months before George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmad Aubry, and everything else meant that we were in the process of building a culture instead of trying to fix one. But that is not to say that newsrooms should not be trying to fix this, should not be trying to address this, because at the heart of both the dual pandemics of coronavirus and systemic racism, we know that there are inequalities that have been laid bare and that are being confronted. And newsrooms are not immune from that confrontation and that discussion, and hopefully a new normal going forward.
Are you hopeful?
I am because, again, because there are more, not enough, but more people of color in newsrooms in this country today, but also there are, frankly, a growing number of white Americans who understand that this is a problem that they should also care about and that they should also confront, so that things are different going forward than they have been. And so, I think for newsrooms that understand that this is a journey, this is not just about what happened this summer, and that when it goes away from the headlines, there's still so much work to be done, internally to bring about the kind of change that frankly people were not only out in the streets for, but were raising concerns in newsrooms. I mean, imagine being somebody who is in a newsroom covering this national reckoning on race, and then looking around and saying, these issues are a problem here too. This is not just about Black people being, the unrelenting killing of Black people by law enforcement in this country. This is about everything. And so we must address, these underlying issues wherever they exist, including, in these newsrooms.
do you feel it's a generational shift in thinking in newsrooms?
Well, I think I actually think it's more cyclical. Because we know what needs to be done to address diversity in newsrooms, and the reason that we know that is because in 1968, after there were riots across this country, in the wake of the civil rights movement, you had a commission, a federal commission, the Kerner Commission, that had to examine the basis of those riots, what was happening in this country, especially as it pertained to African Americans, and what the role of the media was in that, and how the media and this country could do better going forward. And so what the Kerner Commission said, they laid out recommendations for how American journalism could do better. And it started with the idea that these communities needed to be covered holistically and not just in times of crisis. It started with the idea that there needed to be more gatekeepers who were people of color, decision makers who were people of color, who were covering, the Black community in totality, and who, were hiring folks who came from those communities and who could speak with authority about those communities on a range of issues. And so that was a recommendation. It was not followed nearly as much as it should have been. And so is it any surprise that we are still grappling with these issues when we did not kind of take our medicine more than, half a century ago?
You mentioned Breonna Taylor, and this is one of the stories that you absolutely drove forward and turned into the kind of the hashtag, but also the movement that it became. Could you talk us through a little bit about the process, really? Why you spotted it, and with what conversations you had in the newsroom? Because it's a kind of interesting point of intersectionality between race and gender there.
Well, you know what, Mira, thank you for bringing up Breonna Taylor and continuing to talk about that case. That was a case that became a significant story for us at the 19th. And honestly, when I came to this job, again, I'd been covering issues of, the intersection of race and a lot of things in my former role, and wrote a lot about the emerging modern protest movement in this country that we know as Black Lives Matter. And that meant covering a lot of these shootings, a lot of these killings. And frankly, I thought that when I came to this job that I was done doing those kinds of stories. And Ahmad Aubry, who the jogger who was shot and killed by, white men who were in the neighborhood and kind of took it upon themselves to do that. That happened in my native Georgia. I saw that case, didn't initially watch the video because I didn't have to watch it for work. And like, as a Black person, I really didn't want to, deal with the trauma of having to see that video. And I knew I didn't have to write about it because it wasn't necessarily a story that, the 19th would have really covered. But then Breonna Taylor happens, and Breonna Taylor was put on my radar by their family attorney, Ben Crump, who frankly has had to represent too many families in too many of these tragic shootings across the country, going back to Trayvon Martin in 2012. And so he reached out to me and said, Errin, I need to talk to you. We need to talk about this case. He tells me about a 26-year-old EMT, so frontline essential worker, basically, in this pandemic, who is out here trying to save lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And in the middle of the night on March 13th in her apartment, she is gunned down by law enforcement there who were serving a warrant. And, he tells me this story and I'm horrified, listening to the details of it. And then he tells me that it happened 2 months earlier. And I was shocked by that because I couldn't believe that something like that could have happened and that it would have not been on anyone's radar kind of outside of the Louisville community, right? The local community had been, covering that story. They'd been on that, but really, honestly, partially, yes, because of the pandemic. It was a story that had not risen to the level of a national story. But frankly, I think too, From my point of view, having covered, like I said, several of these, when we are talking about a woman who has been killed or harmed by law enforcement, those stories do not get the attention that Black men get when this happens to them. And so I did feel like there was a gender angle, not just because it was a woman who had been killed, but because this was a frontline worker, and we know that those are also disproportionately women. And I felt like we had an opportunity to tell this story, and to tell the story of, frankly, the dual pandemics converging in such a grotesque and unfortunate way. And so I go back to my editors and say, look, we have an opportunity. The family is coming to us first. They want to talk to us first, to tell Breonna's story, to talk about her life and also her tragic and death. And I think that this is a story that we should do. And, it was something that occurred to me immediately as a 19th story. It didn't take long to convince my bosses that there was an asterisk there for us. Our asterisk, again, officially about the omission of Black women from the 19th Amendment, but also it's kind of a North Star for us. When we talk about stories and whether or not the 19th as a newsroom should weigh in, we often ask ourselves, what is the asterisk here? And the asterisk for the Breonna Taylor story was, again, that Black women too often do not get the attention that they should, that we feel that they should around these shootings, and that this was an essential worker who was already worried about her health and safety, whose health and safety were taken, in the midst of this pandemic, in the ongoing pandemic of the killing of Black people by law enforcement who are unarmed, and to whom this should not be happening. So that was a story that did end up getting Breonna Taylor's name, that hashtag trending, and really helped to fuel the national conversation around her case and pushing for accountability, from a legal standpoint in her case, but really just greater awareness around the fact that we should be amplifying these cases, whether they happen to Black men or Black women in this country.
I'm interested, why do you think Black women's killings don't get the same coverage as Black men's?
Well, because there's not enough emphasis on the lives or deaths of Black women in this country, period. And that's whether we're talking about, these killings from law enforcement, Tatiana Jefferson, Sandra Bland, you name it, but also, Black transgender women. Also, almost 40 have been killed this year in the midst of a pandemic, and we are not talking about that nearly enough. But the 19th is a place where we are talking about, the fact that this is happening, and that Black trans women are also having to worry about their health and safety from the standpoint of coronavirus, but also just the usual threat to their lives that exists. And so, this is not a problem that is new to either the Black Lives Matter movement or the pandemic, frankly, but it absolutely has been exacerbated by both of those phenomena. And so when we have a chance to use journalism to emphasize that point and to explore kind of why that persists, I think that is useful in helping to change that.
Thank you. I mean, you talked about the kind of perspectives of the different people in your newsrooms, and Kate Sosin had a really interesting thread yesterday about the inclusivity of the newsroom and the training. And it's a question from Caitlin saying, could you share some of the lessons your team learned during the training sessions you undertook to make the team a more inclusive space?
Absolutely. And listen, Kate is one of my favorite colleagues. I saw her in their thread yesterday and was thrilled that they were sharing that story because we are on a journey as a newsroom, right? I mean, we launched this newsroom, saying that we were going to be, for and by women, which absolutely is important because women have been too long overlooked in this democracy and in our conversation about this democracy. But there are other marginalized groups in this country, including the LGBTQ community, that is not centered often enough in our mainstream journalism. And we need to do a better job of that. And I think that an important first step for us in doing that was hiring Kate and bringing their journalism to this newsroom and saying that this is journalism that we want to make central to our storytelling. But also understanding that Kate was not going to be the only one and should not be the only one discussing these issues in our newsroom. And so, and even, in their hiring, that it was not Kate's job to do our work to understand this community and to accurately be covering this community, right? And so we have had training on LGBTQ coverage. That is ongoing. Those lessons are ongoing. We have talked about how we should be talking about, the coverage of gender, politics, and policy as a newsroom, to be as inclusive as possible, to be, like I said, that home for people in this country who have too long felt unseen and unheard in our politics coverage. And so while I think that we are a work in progress, I think that we have already made tremendous progress. And it was affirming to see Kate's Twitter thread yesterday, because it means that we as a newsroom are headed in the right direction, quite frankly, helped tremendously by their insights, their patience with us, but also just the relationship that they have been willing to have with so many, me and so many of my colleagues, means that when it is time to have, hard conversations, because again, even though we are not fixing culture, we are building it is still hard too.
Yeah. I mean, that leads very nicely to the next question from Kathy English, who's one of our journalist fellows from Toronto. And she said, thanks for raising the Kerner Commission, which she's recently read about again. And why do you think the journalism industry has, for so long, 50 years, failed so miserably to create this kind of diverse, inclusive newsroom committed to anti-racism and universal rights and equality?
Because it means white people have to give something up. And they don't want to do that.
It's about power.
It is definitely about power. I mean, yes, you could spend the money and hire some more people of color and prioritize people of color, right? But that's not happening either, right? And we know that when there have been downturns in our industry, diversity is often first on the chopping block. For whatever gains there have been, in the generation since the Kerner Commission, there have also been tremendous losses because of the cutbacks in newsrooms across the country for economic reasons. Those economic reasons often translate into, sacrifices for, in diversity coverage. But also, in the way that folks are thinking about how race is, race is the unfinished story of our democracy. It is the story of our time. I really believe this. And yet, there are still too many places that are content with kind of siloing race and race coverage, as opposed to making it a newsroom-wide priority. The intersection of race and business, the intersection of race and sports, the intersection of race and education. I mean, you look perennially at the end of the year, you see these stories, these roundups of the top 10, top 20, whatever stories of the year. Many of them, if not most of them, will have a race angle. Why? Because race is so central to who we are as Americans. Whether you want to acknowledge that or not, you try to get away from it. No, you can't do it. And even the story of this pandemic is largely a story about race. when we know the people who have been disproportionately killed, when we know the number of people who are disproportionately unemployed, when we know the number of people who stand to lose their housing, who are, working in nursing homes, who are trying to figure out childcare. We know who those people are. That is also a race story.
Thank you. That leads to the next question from Franca Phillip, which is that you've done some amazing journalism around women and colour in the pandemic. And how will you be following up as the rollout of the vaccines take place? Do you have a kind of storyboard set up?
Absolutely. Listen, so I will tell you, Mira, we started this newsroom this year. I was pumped. I was ready to go. If you are a political journalist, covering presidential elections is like the Super Bowl. Like, you're so excited. It's like the World Cup, whatever. I guess the analogy would be appropriate outside of the US. I was tremendously looking forward to covering this election. And for the first 3 months of the year, that's exactly what I was doing. I was on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. But then the pandemic hit, and I was grounded here in my home in Philadelphia. And, I thought, well, okay, if I'm not covering the election, what am I doing? But fairly quickly, I realized, you know what? No, this pandemic is going to impact women greatly. How do I get a piece of this story? How do we talk about what is now going to be the biggest story of this year? And what we figured out was that there was absolutely a lane for us as the 19th, which was, originally, yes, gender, politics, and policy. But because of the inequalities that have been laid bare in this pandemic, because women are the majority, not only of the electorate, but of the workforce and the US population, we knew that we had stories to tell about this. And so given though that we were, still pretty new, I think I was still the only reporter at the time that we conceived of this idea. But what I decided to do, since I was already here in Philadelphia, which is the city that is the poorest big city in America, that already had inequalities that were front and center before this pandemic happened. I thought that if I could tell the story of the pandemic, one issue at a time, one woman at a time, in this city, the cradle of our democracy, that we could make an impact, and that we could have a snapshot of what this crisis was like for women in America. And so that was how we launched Portraits of a Pandemic, which was deeply rewarding work for me because it gave me a sense of purpose. Once the campaign trail basically went away under my feet. And, that is something that we are absolutely committed to as a newsroom. Our economics reporter has written about the she-cession, America's first female recession, where, women have been just knocked off their feet because of the way that our employment system is set up in this country, and their ability to stay in it. And what that's going to mean as we, attempt to reopen. How the healthcare system is impacting pregnant people and in the pandemic. Our healthcare reporter has been focused on that. How women lawmakers in Congress are trying to confront the inequity that the pandemic has exposed. Our Woman in Congress reporter has been thinking about that. So, this is something that as a newsroom, thinking about the new normal for women and marginalized folks in this country who are not going to go back. They don't want to go back. They say there must be a new normal going forward around racial inequality and around this pandemic. And so, yes, as these vaccines are, being approved and are starting to roll out, is that happening equitably? Who gets those vaccines? And how does that help us really to recover as a country, as an economy, and as a society? We are absolutely committed to that. And so, yes, please stay tuned for our coverage on that, because this is absolutely, women are not disproportionately dying, but in almost every other aspect of this pandemic, we are being hit the hardest.
Thank you very much. So a question from Catarina Carvalho from Portugal, one of our editors-in-chief who's with us. And just asking, do you think that this model that you have could be exported to other markets and media landscapes, ones that are certainly smaller, more limited in resources? And linked to that, another question from Kathy was about your funding model. What is your basically, what is your kind of funding model? What's your long-term funding model and your business case?
Yeah, I mean, look, so, we are a nonprofit newsroom, and the nonprofit business model is something that, you do have new media outlets exploring. We have seen kind of the devastation that has been wrought, frankly, by, corporate newsroom ownership, with the rise of the internet and the loss of kind of traditional advertising models. It can be, it has been devastating. As folks are kind of accountable to shareholders and what that means for the journalism. For us, our funding, comes from multiple sources, whether that is private donors, who certainly were integral to us being able to launch our newsroom with a pretty, healthy, launching pad, or whether that has been corporate support, which was not necessarily as robust, of course, with the pandemic as we maybe were expecting for year one, but has nonetheless been a key part of the support that we've gotten. But also, we are a membership-driven organization, and we have thousands of members who have said, that we support the journalism that you are doing. We want to be on this journey with you. We believe in the mission of this work, and we are going to show that with financial support. And that support has come in amounts as small as $19, which is really very humbling. It's very touching for me to, especially when I was still out in the world, to see somebody at the airport or to see somebody who had seen me on television to say, I really believe in you. We're really rooting for you guys. We really want you guys to make it because this journalism is really important. And to show that also with whatever they are able to give is really important. Now, as far as, I absolutely think that this is something that can be replicated. And I think that, it is, you are seeing, new ventures in American media all the time. And I think the democratization of journalism, born a lot of times out of the frustration of what does not exist, is something that I think is going to continue to happen, not just in this country, but probably around the world.
Can I ask you a little bit more about the membership model? Because I'm always fascinated by news organizations and the membership models. What's your relationship with your members, and is it different to your wider readers?
You know what? I love our members so much. And I, it's funny, I come from a newspaper wire service background, right? Newspapers, I'm old enough to remember when they would put your phone number, and your email on, at the end of your stories. And so people could reach out to you directly, and that was not always a great feeling. But, but here, the membership is, we're a startup, but also, with the rise of social media, people feel a connection to the journalists in our newsroom. And that includes me. That includes everybody. Our CEO is responding on Twitter to people, that is amazing. The community that we have been able to build and create, particularly with a lot of our virtual events as well, right? The summit made us feel so connected to our readership. That was so exciting. The live events that we do, the conversations that we have, interacting with folks on Twitter around those as well. People really do feel like they are on a journey with us. We are making history. They are helping us to make history. Join us, when we say join us in doing something that has never been done before, I think that's very powerful for a lot of folks, particularly women who are feeling empowered by the journalism that we are doing. I'm thinking about this a lot now because, with Giving Tuesday, which was yesterday in this country, that was the launch of our fall membership drive. And so we're trying to get, even more members and hit certain numbers by the end of the year. But, really making the case to them we have far exceeded the numbers that we kind of thought that we could hit this year because of the excitement and enthusiasm across this country that people have for the work that we are doing and the places that they have been able to see themselves represented. They are wanting to show and to express publicly that this is work that matters to them. And I think that having them make the case on our behalf is something that has been a compliment to our journalism in a way that has mattered, I think, a lot to our growth.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it. Last question's coming to the hour, but I'm going to steal a few extra minutes, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Hey, I have caffeine. I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you. From Jenny, you must have had, from Finland, you must have had so many themes or storylines when you launched, that, as well as the election, that you had in your mind that you wanted to do, and then COVID-19 hit. What do you want to get back to next year, hopefully after the pandemic?
You know what, Jenny? I'll tell you what. All the themes that I had bore out in this cycle. The themes that I had going into this election, again, racism is on the ballot, Black women are central to this democracy, and women are the deciders of this election. Racism is still on the ballot, especially because of the systemic racism that was laid bare in this pandemic and made even more acute for people. Black women were central to this democracy, not only in terms of pushing back against voter suppression and registering voters, but also in protecting their communities in the absence of a national plan to address a pandemic that was disproportionately killing their friends, family members, and loved ones. And 3, women being the deciders of this election and seeing this, their politics through the lens of this pandemic. So all 3 of these things only became more true because of what happened with coronavirus and the way that it rolled out in this country. So I felt deeply gratified that the things that I went into this year thinking about bore out, even as they unfolded in ways that I did not anticipate, that we could not have possibly anticipated as a country, as a society, as a world. Now, that being said, you couldn't have told me that we were going to get our first woman vice president this cycle. I did not know that that was going to happen. I was skeptical about, even though we had, a critical mass of women running for president, didn't really think a woman was going to be the nominee, but did not think that a woman was still going to be on the ticket when that possibility vanished. And so what I'm excited to get to on the other side of this election is really looking at, women's leadership. What does it look like, not just for women to campaign and to win, but what does it look like for them to govern at the highest levels, right? I mean, Nancy Pelosi is headed into her last term as speaker, but you have Kamala Harris in this trailblazing role, the second most powerful person in the country. What does it mean for this country's political imagination to see a woman of color doing that job? What does that mean for our country to see that every day? What does it mean for our Congress to continue to become more diverse in terms of race and gender? What are the things that they bring from their lived experience to govern it, right? So thinking about those kind of big questions, continuing to challenge the myth of electability, which it is a myth as far as I'm concerned. People are electable when we elect them. And women are the ones that elect people in this country by and large. So, we are the ones who say who's electable, whether that's men, women, or whoever. So yeah, those are some of the things that I'm hoping that we can get back to next year, even as we continue to grapple with the new normal and the reopening of this country and how we move forward as a society in the wake of this devastating pandemic.
Errin, thank you so much. I kind of want to read everything on the website, and I want to read everything you're going to write next year all in one go as well.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been such an inspiration to talk to you. Thank you for all your honesty, all your work. I can't tell you how important it is for journalists everywhere, and especially women, and especially women of color, to know that the 19th exists and that you've managed to create this product this year as well, especially. It's a real inspiration.
Thank you for saying that so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. As always, we are free to read. We are free to republish. You can get our newsletter for free every single day right now by signing up at 19thnews.org. You can also become a member, at our site. Please, if you have not already looked at our journalism, I encourage everybody to do so. We are off to a great start, but really it doesn't happen without folks who are interested and committed to the work that as we are. And so for folks like you who have tuned in today to learn a little bit more about us, just please continue to spread the word about the 19th. It means so much to us, really. It is deeply gratifying to be in conversation with folks like you, Mira, and to get these great questions about who we are and where we're going. Your enthusiasm jumps through the screen at me, even in a virtual setting. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And please, everybody who's down here, feel free to keep in touch. I talk about politics and Peppa Pig on Twitter at eMarvelous, so I am available and willing to keep this conversation going if you are.
We absolutely are. Thank you so much, Errin. Take care. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. You too. And I'll let you go have your second cup of coffee of the day as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.